And I have the great honor to welcome Professor Ray Pawson. He is the Emeritus Professor in Social Science Research Methodology in University of Leeds, UK, and best known to the evaluation community worldwide as the founder of the method of realist evaluation and of realist synthesis, and for 3 books: Realistic Evaluation, Evidence-Based Policy, A Realist Perspective, and The Science of Evaluation, A Realist Manifesto. All still in print and available at the click of a mouse at Amazon, I have to say. Professor Pawson is retired but still working to complete a final book, provisionally entitled Evidence-Based Medicine and Evidence-Based Policy, a Realist Tryst. Please greet Professor Pawson with a welcoming applause.
Know me well enough to say goodbye and good riddance, but it really is my last presentation. I know Frank Sinatra did at least 15 definitive farewell final performances, but I think this is it. And I chose Sweden because I have this impression, I don't really know how deeply true it is, but I think the possibility of evidence-based policy resides in countries like this. The small Scandinavian countries, to me, seem the best bet for evidence-based policy. In the rest of the world, as you know, it's gone mad. The lunatics have taken over. Post-truth has arrived. Alternative facts have arrived. Fake news has arrived, and it won't be too long before we have fake evaluations. And anyway, on with the presentation. I won't explain my title, but I'll explain the narrative structure. So it's in 3 parts. The first part is the longer one, and basically the narrative structure is this. It's very theatrical. It's bad news, more bad news, good news to finish off with. Can everybody hear me okay? Is the sound and my tie all on view? Good. The first slide merely says bravo to the conference organisers for picking the right topic. I can remember when I began in evaluation, programmes were sometimes called treatments, or as though it was like taking a course of pills for 2 or 3 weeks. We now know that social programs are themselves complex situations which are thrust into a complex world. They're complex systems thrust into complex systems, and that makes the evaluator's job so much harder and limits in the end what we can do. So the slide merely says bravo, we've got the right topic here. Every evaluation society, every evaluation team is wrestling with this program. So let's wrestle for about 50 minutes and see if we can make any progress today. This is quite an important slide. This introduces my notion of complexity and how we should understand it. And basically I contrast over on that side one approach which I'd call the top-down approach. And there's a lot of this about, and it's very useful, but I think of limited use. Basically, it starts by saying, what is the ultimate nature of complexity? How should we understand complex systems? What are complex systems? And a variety of very scholarly approaches have been developed. Complexity theory, systems theory, morphogenic theory, nonlinear science, autopoietic systems, if that's how you say it. Basically, they come from a variety of disciplines: philosophy, sociology, mathematics. And then when you've understood the nature of a complex system, the attempt is to apply that to a social program. I think we should operate bottom up and begin with an understanding of the everyday complexities of social programs. Social programs consist of hundreds, thousands, billions of choices. And once we understand the nature of those choices, we begin, I think, to build up a better picture of complexity. And this is my humble attempt to build up a typology, or in Swedish, a smorgasbord of complexity. So this is a simple typology that I've introduced in the book that you can see there on the bottom of the slide, and its attempt to capture these mundane complexities that occur in every single program that you could care to think of. And I did it in terms of this acronym. It's almost an English word, VICTORE, and those are the components. They're not mutually exclusive. They overlap a bit, and there's probably more than 7, but you should never exceed the magic number 7 in any typology. It's a golden rule. I want to go through them very, very quickly because they have purchase in specific examples, and so I just want to whiz through them in the abstract. If you're interested enough, go buy the book. Volitions, by that I mean the interpretations, the understandings, the assumptions, the wishes of subjects when they come to a program. They obviously are going to vary very, very greatly from people that are enamored of the program to people that are rather reluctant, and all shades of opinion in between. And those volitions, understanding those volitions, is obviously important to the overall success or failure of a program. Implementation. You all know that implementation chains are very long. They often start in central government, go through regional governments, go through a variety of different stakeholders, funders, commissioners, managers, practitioners, before they finally get to subjects. And that implementation chain can be very contorted. And what's more, it's not the job of many people in that implementation chain to assure uniformity of the change. Most practitioners, their job is not to deliver a program in one and the same way. Their basic job is to adapt it, to make it work better. So there's huge complexity built into the implementation chain. Context. This is saying programs are aimed at a variety of groups, a variety of communities, a variety of organizations, a variety of institutions. You'll all have experience of doing that across many different kinds of institutions. The contexts vary right out to the nature of nations and their culture. These different contexts will affect very, very strongly the chances of program success or failure. Time is very, very important and often neglected in evaluation studies. What I'm saying here basically is programs mature at different rates. Sometimes it takes a good year or two for a program to hit peak performance. Sometimes it's the other way around. Interventions like nudge interventions work instantaneously, but then tend to be forgotten. And so time is very important and often underestimated in evaluation programs. Where are we up to now? Outcomes. In any program, you'll often find that there's a whole variety of potential outputs and outcomes. Those outputs and outcomes often can tell different stories. Different indicators can reveal success. Some indicators can reveal failure. And it's important to understand the possibility of cherry picking of particular indicators to show success or failure. Rivalry. What this says is we live in a program-saturated world. There's no program ever that operates in isolation. Most people, most institutions experience several programs alongside each other. And the effectiveness of any one program is shaped by the effectiveness or otherwise of all other programs. We've got to E for emergence. What that says is programs can change the conditions that make them work in the first place. Say again, programs change the conditions that make them work in the first place. Programs try to alter people's environment, the environment that they're in. That can affect the subject's behavior, but it can also affect the chances of success of the program itself. I wasn't going to give any examples of this, but I came upon one yesterday when I was traveling here. So I decided to avoid those terrible queues when you have your bag searched by buying a fast track ticket. You've probably know that system. What happened was so many people had bought fast track tickets that my queue was longer than all of the others. The program had changed the conditions that made it work in the first place. That's a trivial example, and there are much more important examples. But there we are. There is VICTORE. What I want to do now is pick a program and show you how some of those things really bite at the level of research. And the program I've selected is this one. I tried to pick a program that everyone would have some common sense feeling, some basic understanding of what such a program might be like. And my example is this, the Big Brother, Big Sister mentoring program. Some of you might have heard of this. My guess is that there'll be a variant of this in Sweden. The idea, as you see from the illustrations, it goes back to the Greeks. So there at the top is Mentor and Telemachus. Telemachus was a young nobleman frightened of his oncoming responsibilities, and so he went to Mentor, who'd been there, done that, and he advised him of the way forward. At the bottom, we've got a big brother and a little brother, Dwayne and Leroy, and it's the same kind of setup. Leroy is very, very naughty boy, set for a life of delinquency. And Dwayne, who's been there, done that, tries to put him on the straight and narrow. And so it's a common program, and I want to look at one particular evaluation, which is the one mentioned there. It's a randomized controlled trial, and this is the abstract. So that this is the abstract from the American Journal of Evaluation, and what it says is it's a fairly glowing conclusion. That there are tangible benefits for youth after 18 months on this program, and a rather long list of its successes. Started using drugs, less likely to be involved in drugs and alcohol, improved in schoolwork, better grades, better relationships with their peers. So that sounds like very positive and very definite results from a particular evaluation. I want to argue that if you peer very, very closely at the research and the methods, no such definite conclusion appears because of complexity, because they haven't really got to grips with complexity, because they haven't peered closely at all of those elements in the VICTORE model. Let me explain. Whoops. I've got a message about my newest Windows features. I think maybe we'll snooze that one. Yes. Right. Did the BBBS evaluation properly deal with the matter of volitions, the assumptions, the wants, the expectations of the subjects? Now, the best way to some would argue, the best way to deal with these varying ambitions of subjects is to do a randomized controlled trial. And then that ensures that people with different expectations and wants are equally in the control and the experimental group. Alas, we can't do that with such a program, and we can do it with, in fact, very, very few programs, because the subjects are, of course, volunteers. Neither can we compare volunteers with people who don't volunteer for the subjects, because that would be selection bias. So how do we do it? The authors came up with a solution that probably you've come across before, called a waiting list control. So what they do is, because the program is oversubscribed, they randomly assign people to the program and to the waiting list. And the question is, does that handle this tricky issue of volitions, different levels of wishes? I would argue not, because the question lurks there. Could significant outcome differences arise from the weight being detrimental? Oh dear. From the weight being detrimental rather than the intervention being beneficial. And you can argue this both way around. It might be that subjects being made to wait say, oh, bloody hell, I volunteered for this thing. I tried my best and they utterly failed to get me on the program. Or they might think the opposite. Well, I still want to be on the program, so I'm going to be a good boy for 18 months. Which is it? We haven't a clue. We really don't know, because very, very little work is ever done on people who wait on such programs. But I just wanted to let you think for a minute. Right, think of some service that you've had to wait for. What did you think about it? How did it make you feel? Your wishes, your volitions will be bubbling up, and you will know what they are. Waiting is definitely not a null condition. Waiting is not nothing. So the issue of volitions still crops up. Implementation. Huge efforts were made in this program and this evaluation to make sure that the implementation change was repeatable. So they did things like this, the black bullet points, certified training for mentors, mentees are screened, you can read them through. A great deal of work was done to make the process as uniform as possible. Is that, however, truly possible? I would argue not. All of those are really about the mechanics of the process. There's nothing at all in that can tell you what the mentor and the mentee do over the 18-month period. How do they interact? That can't be prescribed and controlled and protocolized, because it's spontaneous. They do what they do when an old person meets a young person. So the actual mechanism, the thing that makes the program work, this interaction, can't be pre-prescribed. There's a lot of argument across the board of many programs of whether you can manualize, whether you can protocolize this human interaction. I would argue you can't. Context. It's obviously useful to know, if you want to learn from this program, who are the little brothers and little sisters? What are the eligibility criteria? Who's eligible and who's not? Again, great strides are made in this evaluation. again, look at the black bullet points. So there are age and residential restrictions, restrictions for those on special programs, restrictions for those with physical and learning difficulties. There's an aim to promote the program to specific subgroups of people. My point here is, again, once they've tried as best as humanly possible to do this, but we still don't really know who are the little brothers and who are the little sisters, because all of those restrictions are local. They're local and specific to the program. So just look at the last one. People that were under the care of statutory authorities, young people in statutory care, weren't, under different welfare operations, weren't allowed on the program. Is that helpful for us trying to learn lessons from this evaluation? I would argue it's very difficult to learn lessons because the particular arrangements are from the United States in particular regions, in particular states, at particular times, and we don't really know what the statutory care regime looks like there. I would guess, repeat guess, that it was quite minimal in the United States at that particular time. If you transfer that across to Sweden, that's very unlikely to be the case. The statutory care will reach much further. So in other words, we don't really know who are the little brothers and who are the little sisters. Finally, outcome measures. And the O in VICTORE. What are the outcomes as measured in this particular evaluation? And what are the limitations? Outcomes are in black, limitations are in red. First of all is that outcome tracing has to be done and has to be complete after the 18-month period, because after that time the waiters could re-enter the program. So you have a snapshot at 18 months and that's it. You don't know whether the findings are durable thereafter. Second one, the impact measures are mostly garnered by self-report. Famous limitations there. Self-report when people are undergoing a program is notoriously difficult. You will know about the Hawthorne experiments. You'll know about social desirability of effects. But here's the big one. The big one is number 3. And this, I think, is, you should recognize this problem. Most programs start life with rather big ambitions, huge ambitions, but often rather poorly specified ambitions. So our evaluators here, again, tried to be rigorous. They went for 5 different possible changes: antisocial behavior, academic performance, family and peer relations, self-concept, social enrichment. Each one of those dimensions had dozens of subscales. Now the point here is this invites a fishing trip, or to change the metaphor, cherry picking. And I think the findings, as I presented to you at the first, are a good example of cherry picking. So, for instance, you have to read the smaller print to notice there's no change in one of those dimensions: social and cultural enrichment. Now that's very strange because the most obvious activity within the program is the big brother and the little brother went out on little trips to the ball park, to events in town. Social and cultural enrichment was a key unexpected mechanism. It for some reason didn't fire. And the other thing, which is vastly important, is again, if you scrutinize the results in detail, what you won't find is uniform benefits. The benefits sometimes favour the girls rather than the boys. The benefits are sometimes for the younger members of the set rather than the older members of the set. In other words, rather than the array of positive findings that they reported in the abstract, the detail of the findings is there's a huge outcome footprint, all different. It works in some circumstances for whom and for different people. In other words, complexity remains. So that's a quick trip through VICTORE and a quick but brief but limited look at some of the examples. Which brings me to the conclusion, to the first part, 27 minutes. The target was 30. What about that? So I've got 3 minutes to draw my conclusions from the bit of the talk on complexity. And I call it the elastic law of evaluation. Some old evaluators here will recognize this is a nod to Peter Rossi. Peter Rossi did the iron law and other metallic laws of evaluation. Mine's much more wobbly than that. It's elastic. I would claim, and I'd be interested to know how many people I've managed to convince, that complexity in those different dimensions can't be vanquished. It's impossible to control for to observe, either observe or control every contingency. That's rather like saying I can follow every decision in human life. You can't trace every possible consequence. So I would say that rather than thinking that we're coming to a comprehensive understanding, or rather than imagining that we've reached some true effects of a program, all evaluations end up with a partial description. Partial means incomplete, because you can't be complete, and it also means that there's this possibility of being highly selective. In other words, cherry-picking some favoured results. Now, I must stress the last bullet point. This law, this elastic law, applies to all methods of evaluation. It's not just RCTs. If I'd have picked a developmental evaluation or a formative evaluation, there'd have been huge gaps there. And I have to say, it even applies to a method I favour, realist evaluation. Realist evaluation can't get to every single contingency in a program. So there's complexity, and my basic argument is it cannot be vanquished. That was the first bit of bad news. Here's some more. This is the second bit of the talk, and it's about policy amnesia. And this part of the talk is influenced strongly by Christopher Pollitt. How many people know Christopher Pollitt's work? Just about enough. This all comes. This is inspired by these two papers. One called Institutional Amnesia, and one called Bureaucracies Remember, Post-Bureaucratic Organizations Forget. What Chris is arguing is something that I think will be familiar to you. When I started evaluation, which was kind of a long time ago, there weren't many things around called programs. Problems were dealt with by the large bureaucracies. So if there's a problem in education, schools would be marshalled to deal with it. If there was a problem in health, hospitals and general practitioners, they would be summoned and expected to sort it out. These days, policy is very, very largely run through programs. And one reason for that is the change in the nature of the bureaucracies themselves. What Pollitt calls the replacement of the traditional bureaucracy by post-bureaucratic organizations. I mentioned a few of the features of these post-bureaucratic organizations there, eight of them. You'll be familiar with these. Hierarchies in these organizations are becoming flatter. Contracts are becoming shorter. There's less career structure and more jumping. Those kinds of things are changing in the agencies and the big bureaucratic structures that govern policy. I recognise those. I wonder if you do. I certainly do. But here's the punchline. Pollitt figures that this produces amnesia. This produces memory loss, and I'll read this bit out. In post-bureaucratic organisations, policymakers and their advisors may be unaware of the existence of previous evidence, even if it's archived somewhere in their own organisations. So if they are aware, he says, they may discount such evidence as irrelevant, outdated, unreliable, politically awkward, and thus best forgotten. So he's describing something that I think you will recognise. And I certainly perceive it like this. Nowadays, there's a never-ending assembly line of programs. This, by the way, is very good for evaluation business. Will keep us in a job for many a happy year, but I'm not sure whether the grand total result is that welcome. Basically, it goes like this. I'm exaggerating to make the point. We have a problem. The problem is sent to an agency. Something must be done. The agency then improvises because it's not got very good memory. It comes up with a solution. It hires a management team to promote the program. The management team improvises some practitioners. If we're lucky, there might be a pilot program, and then an improvised evaluation team joins in at the end. And that I think, let me go to the result. What that's produced are endless evaluations of endlessly complex programs generating endless partial descriptions. So we have partial descriptions amounting everywhere, and I'm not sure that they gel together. This idea that the new commissioners rather repeat themselves without realizing they're doing so. I thought better look for some evidence before I just spout that as a generalization. So I thought, let me have a look at mentoring these days. Are mentoring programs still taking place? And I was delighted but saddened to find this press release. This is from 2 years ago in the UK, and the Prime Minister announced a new generation of mentors to help struggling teams. And what was the program? Well, again, it was a mentoring program. It did add, in the modern way, what in English are often referred to as some whistles and bells, some additional accoutrements. So there was a top-level guru, Mavis Blenkinsop. I've changed the name to protect the innocent. But if you look at the bare bones of the program, it's a mentoring program. There's lots of social media whistles and bells on the end, of course, because there's no self-respecting program these days wouldn't have a Twitter feed and things like Snapchat or NetMums, whatever they are, as part of it. So that program has never been tried before, but it's not a new program. But it would be evaluated as a new program, and the poor evaluators would have to chase over after that lot, find out that it worked in some respect, it was implemented well in some respect, and not others. They would produce another partial description. More proof of the pudding. I also looked at mentoring and where it's gone these days. It started in the, can you read this? In the top corner with other copycat programs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, then other youth programs. And now it's travelled the width of of a social policy. So there are more programs that haven't been tried before, but they're not new programs. So, more bad news. End of part 2. We seem to be stuck with endlessly describing endless evaluations. Is there hope for us? Do we have a chance? Is there a point of it all? Yes, there is. There is. And I offer you a solution, and of course it's a partial solution. It's a very humble solution. The solution is about changing the unit of analysis, not being fixated by every new program, but working at a slightly more abstract level. Now, I'm hardly the first person to think of this. My first time, the earliest I've been able to trace in the literature is from a book, I think, by Lester Salomon, who argues this. You can read it for yourself, but basically he's saying, rather than focusing on individual programs or even families of individual programs, what we should be looking at are the generic tools of government action. Things that are used, ideas that are used over and over again in different public programs. Now, I know you will be familiar with this idea because the next quotation comes from well, it's not actually a quotation, it's something that he said, and it's the same idea taken to ridiculous over-exaggeration, which I love. Everett says, rather than thinking of these zillions of programs, really there are only 3 kinds of policies and programs: carrots, sticks, and sermons. Wow, what that's just totally brilliant. And so start thinking at those higher abstract levels, and you begin to learn lessons. Now, I've borrowed this idea and tried to shape it into a method called realist synthesis. If you've not heard of it, training programs are widely available. Consult Dr. Wong over at the back there, who will steer you on the way to a training program in realist synthesis. What it's saying is, rather than thinking of individual programs and imagining that we can replicate them, these broad policy themes sweep from program to program, and what we should do is sweep up the evidence from the vastly different kinds of evaluations that have taken place. I tried to set down the logic there, and I'm calling these theory repositories. So basically, this is not the method, this is the logic of realist synthesis. So what it says is that we begin with a generic idea. We begin with what's often called program theory. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the notion of program theory. And what we should look at are program variants. So programs, not necessarily even with the same name or the same title or in the same in the same policy domain, but programs that have used that program theory, and there will be dozens of them. We never get to the end of the list, but let's start somewhere. Then we examine the program evaluations, and what each evaluation will tell us is about some of the contingencies, some of the complexities, some of the difficulties that have occurred in pursuing this program theory. So what we're doing in looking at the program evaluations is not looking for winners and losers. We're looking for explanations of the difficulties and the extent to which they can be overcome. And what you do is package those up into a systems model, which literally does that. It packages the understanding, the present understanding of the fate of of different parts of the program theory. That's quite hard to explain in the abstract. So what I'll do is show you what one of these system models looks like. And of course, I go back to mentoring to do it. So this is a synthesis of the evidence from dozens and dozens of youth mentoring programs. And you see, it's not like a meta-analysis. This is not an attempt to come to some net effect. It's an attempt to gather together and model the complexities. I could take 10 minutes to go through this, but I have got 4.5 left. So I'll hurtle through this, and hopefully you'll pick up enough to see what I'm getting at by these ideas of a model of system dynamics, a model of complexity, if you like. So over on the far side, there are several pieces of research that have looked more closely in what actually flows between the mentor and the mentee. What is the nature of the interaction? As you will recall from our first piece of research, the research failed to lay its hands on at all on what's the nature of the interaction. Studies that have looked at it more closely are making a discovery. They're saying, well, mentoring can mean different things. At its most basic, it simply means befriending. The mentor will have a cheerful, happy relationship with a mentee once a week for a while. It might involve rather more ambitiously direction setting, where the mentor gently suggests to the mentee that life could be different and maybe you ought to aim your life this way. It could involve coaching. So that is, you're going to need some skills if you're going to change yourself. I can coach you in a few of these aspects. It might involve advocacy. It might say, well, I can put you into contact with X who could help to make you change. The widths of the arrows are about frequency and success. Befriending is relatively easy, and the others are that more rare and that more difficult. So we've learned a little about those inner complexities by borrowing from a whole range of research. The jagged arrows refer actually to the most frequent finding from mentoring research, namely that the relationship very frequently breaks down. 18 months is an astonishingly long time for a relationship to last. Often they last weeks, months, and that's it. Why? Because you're not removing the mentee from the situation that caused his or her problems in the first place. So they're still in the same gangs, they're still in the same neighborhoods, and friendly lessons from a mentee aren't possibly going to overcome that. So the thing collapses. What does the mentee do then? Engages in another range of activities. So where possible, they try to build trust, build confidence, build resilience. So this is a further understanding of the nature of the internal relationship. But there are external relationships that are important in mentoring too. Remember, the aims involved bettering relationships with the square boxes, these different contexts. What another piece of research says is that what happens in mentoring often doesn't gel very well. It often contradicts what the mentee then has to face when they go back to the family and peers, go back to the education and training. Education and training is requiring discipline, whereas the mentor is unlikely to have stressed that. So again, the relationship can break it down again, saying, well, life's the same. It's not helping, and you're involved then in another round of the mentors, then involved in another round of firefighting mechanisms. I've horribly garbled that. If you want to read that in full, that's in the book called Evidence-Based Policy: A Realist Perspective, Chapter 6, I think. Still in print, still available from Amazon. now, I haven't had enough time to really go through that in any detail, but what I want to show you is the difference between an evaluator or a synthesizer who tries to draw a system map and one who tries to draw definite conclusions from a particular evaluation. I think that presented before the next evaluation, before Mavis Blenkinsop attempts her next mentoring program, knowledge like that, a theory repository, would be probably the most important thing evaluation or synthesis can do. Which brings me to the very last slide, on time, I think. Plenty of time. Good. Well, I want to hear you disagree with me, so let's get through the final slide. On the basis of all that reasoning, here are Pawson's further laws, elastic laws of what evaluation can and cannot offer in the face of complexity. What I'm saying is, remember, VICTORE cannot be vanquished. You can't get to the end of every evaluation story. So it can't do what many people, the great hope of evaluation was that it would produce some kind of clearinghouse so we could have definite decisions. This body of programs works. This body of programs are failures, and the jury is still out on this intermediate group. I would say that every program works somewhere, no program works everywhere. There's always contingencies, and outright definite decisions like that are simply implausible. That might be bad news, but I think the green news, the bit of the green for go, is more important. We can offer these dynamic systems maps, which explain, that's the right word, they explain some of the complexities associated with particular policy instruments, particular generic theories. And I think those system maps are what we should be aiming for. Final cannot. We cannot give a rule book. We cannot print a protocol for the policymaker, manager, or practitioner to follow. We cannot tell them, this is the program and this is how to implement it. But what we can do is provide he or she with some memory via these program system maps. And what they're saying is not do it this way, don't do it this way. They're saying here are the set of programs, here are the set of puzzles, here are the set of contingencies, and it's for you to think them through. We can give broad outlines of advice. You'll find them very useful, but the minute-by-minute decisions, we can't possibly begin to tell you how to implement your program. Evaluation, theory-driven evaluation, is all about thinking through. So it ends with the theory, and it begins with the theory, and it ends with a set of ideas which the practitioner has to think through. End of story. Thank you very much for listening.
So if you want to put a few questions to Professor Pawson. Are there any questions?
I think I should say something since you refer to the carrot, sticks and sermons. At least I can tell the story. Carrot, sticks and sermons, käppar, morötter, predikningar. That's a Swedish metaphor, actually. And the nice thing with it was the sermons part. because we usually talk about sticks and carrots much more, but the sermons part. And I can tell you that Ray Rist was very negative to this, my co-author, and all Bemelmans Videk, she was more fond of it, but Ray Rist, he argued against it. This is too low. But what you actually argue here is that you should look at programs. I call them interventions, by the way. I use a more general concept even there than programs. You should look at the various programs and try to find some generic features in them. Isn't that your basic idea?
Yeah.
And basically, as an evaluator, it would be very nice to have a list of generic features that you could use, actually. And the carrot, sticks, and sermons is one of them. And I think you made a list of mentoring, the kind of, well, mentoring is kind of a general idea also, but it contains of befriending, coaching, advocacy. That could be an illustration of your method, couldn't it? But the basic idea is to try to find out generic, more general feature. This is not a question, it's just, you know, I try to understand what you said, to repeat.
You'll be glad to know that we agree on that, though we probably agree on the difficulty. Carrots, sticks, and sermons, beautiful as it is too crude, because this, and I think I'm on to what Ray Rist was thinking of. The sermon in English sounds like sermonizing, telling people what to do. But any education, any training involves a measure of a diet. Okay, so we've got another word. We had those 4 mentoring words, and the trick, I think, is in social science terms, it's called middle range theories. So interventions thought of at the middle range. I've done a particular synthesis on something called naming and shaming policies. I'm not sure whether that's a carrot, stick, or a sermon, but this idea of bringing to the public's attention the performance of a particular body, that occurs right across the spectrum. So you have in England we have school league tables. We certainly have university league tables. We have lists of offenders who've not paid their television licenses, which are broadcast in the papers, and endless repetitions of the same broader idea of bringing to the public's poor performance to the public's attention. They don't belong in a particular policy domain, but it's an idea that travels across policy domains. And you can learn a lot by those contrasts. Naming and shaming work particularly well in the UK car industry, where there was a list quite a few years back of cars which most easily broken into and stolen. The car industry was offended by that, shamed by that, rather, I should say, because it hurt their pocket, and they did something about it straight away. Other instances of naming and shaming, people rather like being named because they're not shamed at all. Some offenders fall into that category. So you can see patterns building at this generic level. The awfully difficult trick is how many of these generic policy areas that you want to try and tackle. But who cares? Let's get on with the business rather than imagining we can come up with a list of 99 key thematic policies.
You have a question?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for a very, very nice presentation. I got stuck when you asked me to make a leap of faith, going from endless partial descriptions of partial evaluations to theory building. I get stuck because I don't see how you can get rid of some kind of quality discussion about the research methods that's used in all these partial descriptions or partial evaluations, because you are using them for theory, but if the research methods are bad, I mean, should you really be doing the theory out of them?
I've written a paper, I'm trying to remember its title, it's called How Bad Research Can Produce Good Evidence.
Sounds nice.
And it answers your question perfectly. So if you get a piece of qualitative research, you often may come across it, which describes the heroic struggles of the practitioners to deal with their subjects.
So you're still asking me to make a leap of faith?
Yeah, no. Wait. You might think, well, I do appreciate that. I do make a methodological judgment that they've been there, done that, and applied good field work. In the same report, it might say, and on that basis, we can conclude mentoring works. And that bit of the research you discount immediately because they've not gathered any evidence on outcomes, it being a piece of qualitative research. So you're dead right. I'm not dismissing I'm not saying that every fragment of evidence counts. All I'm saying is evidence is fragmented, and in pulling it together, we have to make a judgment, and it's a methodological judgment, and it's a quality judgment on whether what they say is true. So coming back to the RCTs, in general, I don't think you can perform RCTs, but even on that one, there was some very interesting data there on the subgroups. For some reason, a bit of the program seemed to work for girls, little sisters, rather than little brothers. Insofar as that could well be true, I take notice of that. I want to draw it into my synthesis. I therefore take it on trust that they've done this research as rigorously as they can, but they've not answered that question. So they've left that question unanswered. So there's a fragment of possibly good evidence in other respects bad piece of research. So no, I apply my trade as a methodologist. I make judgments all the time about methodological quality, and indeed all research synthesis does that. So if you're doing a meta-analysis, you discount everything that's not a randomized controlled trial. What I'm saying is that you've got to be rather more light on your feet in terms of saying what's good and what's bad. So qualitative research can be good and bad. Quantitative research can developmental research can be good and bad. So at some time, you have to make that decision, but you make that decision in the synthesis. So if you read some realist synthesis, it will usually take a particular study and say why this particular bit of the reasoning seems justified and why other bits don't. And not claiming that it's just a kind of scattergun. I'll have this piece of evidence here and I'll have this. There has to be some logic behind the choice. I hope that partially. Anyway, you have the name of the paper. Read it.
Hi, my name is Bo Sandberg. I work for the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth. But this is a story from a previous life, and I just want to start by maybe just the cherry picking of result is not only made by evaluators, but obviously also by other stakeholders.
Yeah.
And what was interesting listening to is that maybe 15 years ago I evaluated a mentor program when it was kind of brand new in Sweden, early 21st century. And it was quasi-experimental because it was based on volunteers. You know, we couldn't. But the results were basically then that there were no results on drug use, alcohol consumption, delinquency. And I was not surprised, but the agency or the NGO that ran the program was obviously not really satisfied by this. On the other end, the actual sort of befriending part is what was really appreciated by the youth. They actually made, you know, or thought they made a friend that had a different background and a different sort of end result to their career than they were most likely to get. But they also felt kind of hopeless at the when we did the follow-up study, because they understood that they can never become bankers. But what is my point here? I think that, you know, in the end, the program owner, you know, they switched the focus and the marketing of the program to become more of a social, get to know, and get a role model than the actual outcome. So it's a cherry picking on many ends, and in the end, I think that, you know, sometimes policymakers have to think about what is actually the interesting part. Can we change these complex systems? Can we change a young person without moving them from their family or the neighborhood or the school or whatever? And actually, so I just want to hear what you think about that. If you turn it to, you know, who is the cherry pickers really in social development?
Well, I think your story is entirely consistent with what I have to say, and guess what? Policymakers, politics always trumps evidence, and so policymakers will often make desperate attempts to show that their program worked, even though it wasn't their original intentions. But I think underlying what you have to say, I hear a great deal of theory exploration. So my guess would be that the young people on your program were somewhat different from the ones on Big Brother, Big Sister. If you look at the small print of who gets onto the program, they have to jump through an awful lot of hoops to get there. This program's not called American Badass. It's called Big Brother, Big Sister. It's all very nice and friendly. And your experience accords perfectly with the UK experience of mentoring, which that it works really well as befriending, getting to learn to this surprising new friend, but doesn't walk an inch further. And I think you can probably explain it by the selection criteria. I don't know what the selection criteria is for you. So you have a overall explanation for it. And for good or bad, it's not in the evaluator's hands. Evaluators can't avoid cherry picking, but they can provide explanations, and in the end, the explanations are powerful.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, how would you deal with complexity when you don't really have the time to do a synthesis? I work in the beautiful world of development cooperation, and there I usually have 30 to 40 days to evaluate in a qualitative way very complex interventions in very complex contexts. and the expectation is to find something about the results, not really to present a map of complexities. So I was just want to hear your your reflections on that. Thank you.
Poor man is what I say. And I share your pain. I know, but in a way, you are exemplifying institutional amnesia. You know that alas is the way that policies are made. It's not for me to say you should get up there and say halt. We need to think this. We need to think this through. Though even though that is the that is the true answer. But my guess is that you're much smarter than that, and that you do because of your job have some nous about this, some deep intuitions about this programs, and deep intuitions are vaguely connected with theory maps. So I would say, Jedi, trust your feelings and broadcast them to the policymakers.
Well, one approach actually is to make a reference to realist evaluation at the beginning of the report, just to show that this is a very partial evidence that we present.
Yes, okay.
So you've been very helpful in that way.
Yes. Then I have a question.
Okay.
It is some years since the sort of what works movement started sort of with trying to use RCTs and so on in the UK, firstly, I think, or in the US, that using sort of trying to find evidence on how to sort of design policies so that you effectively could tackle societal problems in different ways. Isn't there something good in trying to saying that, well, that there is a sort of agenda for the society to tackle certain problems and not just to say, well, we give up. We cannot tackle this problem. So if not having any kind of idea of what works, how would you go about then thinking about sort of programs and evaluations in order to learn and to sort of advising on a general level the sort of a country on how to tackle certain issues and problems?
I understand your question and have sympathy with it. The What Works agenda was extraordinarily appealing because it inspired confidence in policymakers that you could generally have a best bet and stick with it. And I'm not kidding myself. That's still a major sentiment that runs through evidence-based policy. But I have to tell you, it is losing ground because of the ambiguous results of many syntheses, the null results of many syntheses that would say, after reviewing 59 programs, only 6 of them were done by RCT, and they're inclusive. In conclusion, actually runs through the what works agenda. But I think you can persuade your policymakers. You ask them for a bit of memory, what it used to be like before they had to run quickly with an intervention and evaluate it. And I'm old enough to vaguely remember that. And so in the British civil servants, British civil service. In my prime, I used to make lots of trips down to London to speak to civil servants. And what I noticed over the years is that they got younger and younger. maybe because I got older and older. But it seemed to me that 20, 25-year-olds were in charge of these national programs, whereas in the old days, civil servants used to spend lots of time on lots of programs and in fact move from from department to department, and so there was some institutional memory. So in the preliminary discussions about having a paper, some greybeard would stroke his chin and say, when we tried this over in the Department of Environment, we came up with these problems. So there was some pride in the fact that the civil service had this generic background knowledge, and I do think Pollitt's right about that. I think that's changed, but not disappeared. I think. If you go to if you find the right person in the right policy department, they immediately recognise what I'm talking about. They immediately recognise the value of a complex system map. They go, yeah, I know about that. And what's more, there's another little aspect here. So I'm not entirely pessimistic about there being the what work. It's either being the what works agenda or it's all too bloody complicated and we don't know what to do. There's something in the middle. Yeah.
Sofia Avdijikova, Oxford Research. There is one dimension that you have not touched upon here, or we have not touched upon here in this discussion, and this is that perhaps we can have a more dynamic view, not only of the tools, how things can be achieved and how we can adjust our approaches, but also what we can achieve with the tools that we have. We have discussed briefly here that some of the programs do not show to work effectively for what we want to achieve, and then we afterward can say, well, maybe something else was the goal of the program. And what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because if we have tools that we find that they effectively work for something else, it could also be a part of the innovation in the public sector. And some of the greatest innovations in the private sector, if you think anything from the post-it to jeans, were actually discovered while trying to do something else.
Yes, unintended consequences are here when you raise your question, and I think they're rife, and a good evaluation will come up with often, just as you say, findings that contradict the initial policy expectation. But the thing to do then is explain them. It's not merely it didn't work like this, it worked like that. It's the why question. The why question has got to pervade all evaluation.
But what I'm also pointing out is that we can take it one step further and make this the part of the learning. Is that what the evaluation shows is that these tools are actually excellent for this and that, and this should be explored further to make better use of the public money. In the coming programs, having perhaps other expected results than the first one.
Yes, insofar as you're saying we need a multi-method approach because different methods have different strengths and different weaknesses, I completely agree with you. If there's a lurking preference there for a particular method, I don't agree with you.
Questions? Well then, we are so grateful that you took your time to come here to Sweden and give your last lecture here, and that is just we are in awe. It's been very good to hear from you and to And I have your books, and I hope more of you will get them if you don't have them already. And as a small token and appreciation from us in SVUF, I want to give you a fair trade chocolate to have as a munch bite now when you have done a good presentation to us.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Do you think I better do another one?
Yeah.
No chance.
Thank you.